What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video, today's live stream. Really excited to get into this one where we're going to look at setting up custom authentication, specifically with Payload, but also just in general understanding how authentication works and setting up social login for our CMS. So we're going to be following the guide of one of the members of our community, the Payload community, the owner of Rubix Studios. If you're part of the Discord, you've definitely seen him. So that's my shout out for him today. But we're going to talk about how to follow his guide in order to set up our Payload login. So not much to it other than that. So we will look at first the page here. So this is what we will be looking through. His entire guide here. I can see my mic is a little hot, but I think we're good here. But yeah, so his guide over here is what we're going to be following. Really just from start to finish, we'll look through the structure, the layers, everything that he calls out and make it make sense. So I know custom authentication is one of the most requested features for Payload. Honestly, there's not much reason for them to implement that or show it in open source because it's part of enterprise packaging. Regardless, we are going to show how to do a little bit more on the SSO side of things. So the first thing we're going to do is over here in my terminal, we're going to create a new Payload app. So we're going to do create Payload app. This is actually not what I want to do. I have a Payload folder. Let's go there first. Now we can create a Payload app. And the project name, we will call this custom auth. Plain template with MongoDB, just to make things easy. So version 3.77 came out today as of the day of this stream. So there's going to be some new things here as well. We're not going to investigate that too much though. So this is done. I'm going to open this up in WebStorm real quick and then drag it on over. All right. This is the wrong project. 1 second. Monorepo. Examples. Payload. Now, I've got the right project. I've clearly worked on custom auth before. So, now with that open, we just have a nice blank template set up with a README and all of that. So, that's all we need to get started with Payload. Let's go to our terminal, run pnpm dev. And then if I go to localhost and then my admin panel, we should see these things spin up, no problem. All right, there's that. Why didn't... There we go. That was weird. All right, so I have a custom auth apparently, so we're gonna see if I might need to override this or if I can use my test email. Perfect. So luckily I use the same test email for everything. Only on the local host. Don't try logging into my sites. It's not going to work. All right, so we've got our collections here, and now we can look at our guide. So all of this SEO content, so we're going to try and cut through a lot of what is being said here. All of it is valuable, don't get me wrong, but we know the structure of Payload. We need to set up really anything with Payload. You need to set up how it communicates. So that's true for custom authentication as well. So it does not initiate OAuth. You have to do that and get the flow set up how you want it. So we're going to start with Google because that's the easiest one. Anybody with Google Cloud Console can set it up. So that's where we'll start and we'll see how far we get. So now we need to implement it with a controlled bridge around Payload's auth pipeline. Again, we just have to set it up. It's something that is doable. It just takes a few extra steps. All right. So we have the different layers here that we're going to break this down into. So there's the endpoint, which you can see here is going to be Google Cloud. So the endpoint is going to be what's provided or what we provide to Google. The callback, same thing. Then we set up the authentication strategy and then the client side trigger. So that's a button, login with Google, etc. So all of that's covered in this guide, and we're going to get into it from there. All right. So all 4 of these need to be aligned before the user has to exist first of all, and then all 4 layers also have to exist and be aligned. And the reason for this is we want to make sure that we have tight authentication. We don't want to just like let anybody log in or create a user. For me specifically, I don't want anybody to be able to create a user for my CMS. There are use cases where you might want that, like if you have a SaaS that you have built on Payload, or if you have multi-tenant structure where you want your users to be able to create a new account and log in that way. But for me, most of my content, most of what I'm going to create is going to require that an admin be added in the create payload user, create first user, and then after that, they then add in all additional users to finally let people log in with Google or via password. But we'll check all of that out here in a second. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get a Google Cloud project created and configured with OAuth credentials. So I do have Google Cloud. I want to make sure that I don't leak any of my credentials though. So I am going to make sure I have that on a separate screen. So any secrets I'm going to leave off screen, but I will include screenshots of how to do this when I actually when I chop this up to be an edited video to be a little bit more streamlined. That's when I'll include some screenshots to make sure that this works. So I'm just in my Google console right now, and I need to log in, which you're not going to be able to see any of this, but I know I'm going to get hit with 2-factor authentication. Glad that doesn't show my phone number. All right. So here we are. This is not where I want to be, sorry. All right, so I'm going to go into an organization. So this is me just talking it out, but I'm going to create a new project, and this one is going to be called Payload Custom Auth, and then create. Again, I will show screenshots as I go while this is, when the video on demand is posted. But the instructions are also here, so I'll call this out as well in the description, which it's already there. So if you need help getting in a little bit further, this is going to be your way to go. So I have a feeling that Safari is not going to cooperate with Google Cloud because that's just how Google is. Okay, we got there. All right, so now we're going to create a new web application. And I'm going to find that by just searching for it. There's a consent screen, but also there is, in general, like as soon as you search for OAuth, if you don't have it already set up, it's going to ask for it. So again, you need an app name, which I'm going to do Payload Custom Auth, and then my email address. I'm going to assign this as an internal app just so I don't have to get it verified to be used. And so just so you can all see it, this is the screen that I'm working on right now. I've got Payload, custom auth, I've got the app information, the audience, which is internal, contact information, and then you just need to agree to the user data policy. Continue and create. And now that's going to bring you to this screen here that I haven't configured any OAuth clients for this project. So I'm going to do that. Again, I'm doing this so I don't leak any secrets by accident. This is going to be a web application, so I can show this. And the name, again, I'm just going to do Payload custom auth. And then we can see here so one instruction missing here, authorized URIs, which I need. Add the Payload OAuth callback endpoint for each environment, including local and production. So that's not exactly clear. We're going to dive in and open this image in a new tab to see. That's not what I want. Image in new tab. It's going to make me download it, but I really just want to zoom in on it. So let's just zoom in then. All right. So this is going to be really hard to see, but we're getting there. So luckily with Safari, I should just be able to. All right. So authorized redirect URIs. Let's add this to the left half. We're just doing this locally. So I'm going to do localhost 3000 API users, and then we'll do Google callback. And I will not set up a production website here, but what you would do is just create another URI and then do something like production.com/API/users/Google/callback. And that's what that second image is there. So you definitely need to have this redirect URI, and we'll hit create, and well, client ID showed, but I think that'll be okay. Not exactly too worried about that, but I could just cycle it. I think it's fine. So I'll select the client ID and hit OK. We're actually going to see if I can refresh the secret now. That doesn't look like it. Client ID is probably okay. Oh, oops. Accidentally created a second client. Okay. So now I need to look in my environment variable, which is not going to have anything specific yet. But now I'm going to drop those in there and then pull out my environment variable, or my environment file anyway. And then from there, I can copy the client ID. Again, these instructions are on the page itself. So we need our client ID there. And then I actually do need to include another secret because it's not letting me copy the other one. So got a client secret, disable the old one. That way I always have just one. And then that's good. So I will leave my environment.env file, or my environment.file over on the other screen so I don't accidentally bring it up. And then I'll just use localhost for my host name for now. All right, so now what we need to do is have the proof key for code exchange. So this is the handoff that we're trying to build between Payload and now Google Cloud, Google Console, Google Cloud Console, whatever, the Google Cloud Platform. So this means that we need a code verifier and a code challenge. And we'll do that by creating a new library, or lib, auth pke.ts. So I'm just going to go and add a new file in our library, auth pke.ts. So we're going to take this step by step. First, we need to meet some requirements, which is going to come from our crypto package, which is just for cryptography. So we want to make sure that we have a very strong code verifier and code challenge to make sure that we have a secure platform and a way to securely hand off authentication, because we want to make sure that we don't have any kind of data breaches or anything like that just from implementing social login. All of that would be a nightmare, and we don't want to do that. So now, both values generated server-side. So that's what we're doing right now. We'll export a new enum, whatever you want to call it, and we'll just call it a code challenge method just to follow the same example. And we want to do plain equals plain, and then, yep, that's exactly right. Then we're going to export a function which is going to generate our code challenge, and we will pass in a code verifier, which doesn't need all of this. It just needs the code verifier as a string. Sometimes the autocomplete gets out of hand. We'll store a hash by creating the hash and then update our code verifier. And then after the update, we will digest. Then once we do that, we can return a base 64 URL, encode the hash. Which comes from a later function. So we will export another function to get or generate rather, our code verifier. And then that is not going to take any arguments. And instead we'll just return our base 64 URL encode. We're going to cryptograph, probably the best way to say that, random bytes 32. And then finally, we can create that function base 64 URL encode, which takes a buffer of type buffer. Then we'll return that buffer to a string for base 64. Then we'll replace, this is replacing regex is hard for me, but it's replacing some things with a hyphen, other things with an underscore. It looks like the plus is going to be a hyphen and the / is going to be an underscore. And then finally, our equal sign will just be an empty string. So now we need to think about our cookies, and that's going to be in our library auth folder as well. And we'll create a new file called cookies.ts. So let's take a look first at what this is doing. So first of all, we're not using any of these functions here, so no usages are set, except for the base 64 URL encode. So we will pass these along here in a little bit. So what we're doing is we're first generating our code challenge. So this is the hash for which we need to compare our code verifier against. That's going to come from a random 32-byte code that's generated by our code verifier. Both of these are going to be encoded by this base 64 URL encode, which uses a buffer, converts that buffer to a string of base 64, and then replaces any unsupported character with supported characters. Now we need our cookies. So we'll check first if we're in production, we'll have our normal process environment, node environment of production. Then we need our constant of hostname, which is going to be the hostname that we set up in our environment variable. And we're going to do a non-null assertion here because this should always be provided. It is provided here locally, and it should be provided on the front end as well. Otherwise, none of this works. So you need to make sure that that is provided on both production and local environments. Okay, so now we're going to get our domain. So if we are in production and hostname, this autocomplete is going to drive me insane, but we're going to use a hostname and we're going to replace it, or sorry, we're going to replace if it starts with HTTPS, and then that is with 2 forward slashes. So if it starts with HTTPS : 2 forward slashes, like most secure sites do, actually all secure sites do, then we're going to split at the semicolon and grab the first item in that array. Otherwise, it'll be undefined. Let me wrap this. If I can remember how to do a soft wrap code. Okay. W. Okay. There we go. So now we can see all of the code all at once. But we can't see it all at once over here. Oh well. So now we're going to set our cookies base. So cookie base, and that's going to be an array. And we'll check path, or sorry, we're going to create our path here. Then HTTP only, same site is lax, and these are normal security headers that we are going to use. So if it's in production, it's going to be secure. Otherwise, an empty string. We can change this to be just single ticks there. And then if domain is true, if there is a domain, we can provide the domain or an empty string and then filter Boolean. So this is going to filter everything. Oh, so this is going to make sure that anything that returns a Boolean is not included. So if it's in production and it comes back as an empty string, that would come back as false, I believe. And then that would then be filtered out, and the same with domain here. So that just makes sure that our cookies are clean. Moving on here, we're going to export a function where we're going to append our cookie with our headers. And let's actually open up the function here to make sure that we see things just fine. So our headers are going to be headers. Then our name will be a string, value string, if I could type. And then our max age will default to 180. Now we can append our headers. And we're going to append, first of all, set cookie. And then we need an array. And we will pass in the name and set that equal to value. And then we need our cookie base. Then finally, max age will be set to max age. And then we're going to join these using a semicolon. So we saw that type error before the join was added. And that's because this is not expecting an array. It's going to expect a comma delimited set of strings, or actually not even comma. It's going to expect a semicolon delimited list of options here. So then we're going to have a new function that clears our cookies. So we will clear cookie, then we will again pass in our headers and then our name of string. Then we will get our headers append. I'm going to close this down. Set cookie, and then we need an array that will pass in first a name, which will be equal to nothing, then our cookie base, which is really just a helper array. It's not, we could just type this every time if we wanted to, but why when we can just make it easier? So max age of 0, and then when it expires, and that will be this very, very long time ago where computer science was officially invented. That's not true. There's a whole story behind this date, so it comes up quite often in some other groups. All right, so we have our PKE, so our proof key, I have to make sure I say that right. Our proof key for code exchange, PKCE. I labeled it wrong because he did, but that's fine. It doesn't really matter. And then we have our cookie set up and a way to clear those cookies. So we've got that part set up. Now it's time to authorize. So we need our endpoint that we used earlier. So if you can recall from seeing the screenshot, that's going to be our user's API route. So we'll pull that up here in a minute. And then, so the endpoint just initiates the OAuth flow. So it's not going to authenticate users. We will do that later on to set the cookies for our user to actually be able to interact with Payload. So that's coming. Excuse me. Talking is hard, if you didn't know. Perfect. So now we can start thinking about our authorization, and we need to do that in a new file, in a new folder, or a new set of folders rather. So we're going to create an API folder if it doesn't already exist. Then we'll use our users, we'll auth and use Google, and that's going to be a TypeScript file. So that brings us there. API users auth google.ts. We then need crypto again. So this is again our cryptographic, not create, cryptographic package. Then we're going to have to install this, but we'll do that here in a second. So we've got Google. I cannot spell. We've got Google from our Google APIs. Then we're going to import our type endpoint. And these are coming from Payload, and then Payload request. And that's not actually how I do this. I'm going to bring the type out here since we're not mixing up types and other things here. All right, so then we need to import our append cookie, and we should be able to use our @alias. Oh, it's not even auth. Oh, it is. Okay, maybe we can't. This is something that broke recently for me where I've not been able to shorten it. All right, so then import our code challenge method, generate code challenge, and generate code verifier from our proof key of cookie exchange, code exchange, proof key of code exchange. I will get there. And then we're going to need a new helper function that we don't have here yet. So this is get server-side URL, and this is something that is used very frequently in payload objects and payload projects. So I'm going to type it out here, but really what we need to do is go to our library, or sorry, we need to create a new file, which will be in our utilities, and that's going to be get url.ts. Then we're going to go to a payload project, which I think we can just do website template. Whoops. This is fine. Everything's fine. And then from here, we're going to go to our source, utilities, get URL, and we're just going to copy this because it's just a helper function. It does what we need, but we do need to change that. And can use DOM as client side, and I don't really need that. So we'll get rid of all of that. And what this is just doing is we're going to get the server-side URL by just checking our environment variable. We don't have a Vercel one, so it's either going to be the public server URL, which is actually going to be, oh wait, we look here. Oh, I guess it'll be this. So I'm going to add this as an environment variable. And this is going to be localhost 3000. So this is always going to return localhost 3000 until we go to production. So now we have our get URL here, but I want to fix it's something in my next config, I think, or no, my TypeScript config. Maybe, just maybe, we'll have my friend Claude help here. Just have to log in now. All right, logged in to Claude. Why isn't my, I don't know why I did it this way. So if I go to terminal, I'm going to open up Claude. I know I don't normally like doing my terminal here, and actually I'm not going to. That seems like it's going to be a nightmare. So let's open up Ghosty, change directory to custom auth, Claude. Why doesn't my @alias work anymore? And we'll let him take a look at that. Take a gander. All right, so then that means I just need to perfect, so that should be right. All right, so now we can get our client ID and set that equal to our process Google Business Client ID. And again, using a non-null assertion because it won't work without it. And then we need our client secret, which is going to be the same. And while we're waiting, let's break out of this real quick and then do pnpm add and get our Google APIs installed. So we don't even need our server running right now. So I'm going to come back up here and just do export a constant of Google auth, which will be an endpoint, which is a payload endpoint. And we're going to pass in a handler, which will be async, and the request will be the payload request. It'll resolve to a promise, which will have a response, and we'll set a constant of URL to be a new URL, which will be the request URL, or an empty string, and then a consent flag. We'll check the search params in the URL and get the force consent flag if it's set to true. So after that, we need to add a client flag, which will check the search params again, and we're going to get our client login flag if it's there, and if that's set to true. All right, we'll take a quick pause to see what Claude has to say. Nothing yet. All right, so under client flag, we're going to initialize, our OAuth 2 client, and that's going to be a new Google OAuth 2. We're going to pass in the client ID and the client secret and the redirect URI, which is going to be our get server-side URL. Then we need our API users auth Google callback. Then we can try to get our constant code verifier. And we're going to generate our code verifier. Then we need our code challenge. And that is going to check the code verifier. Then we need a constant of state, which is going to be a crypto random UUID. Then we need our authentication URL. Our authorization URL. So we're going to pass in we're going to store it in a constant called auth URL. OAuth2 client generate auth URL. Then we'll use an access type of offline with a code challenge of code challenge. Code challenge method will be our code challenge method S256, which is imported, you see, from somewhere else. We already set this up though. This is in our PKCE package or TypeScript file, so we just need to change this to be our code challenge method. Then we'll have a prompt which will check if there's a consent flag. If there is, we'll want to consent. Otherwise, we can just do none. There will be no prompt. I forgot a comma. And then for our scopes, I'm going to copy and paste this because it is from Google itself. These are the Google APIs with the scopes that we want, the email and the profile. Quick break, look at Claude here. Okay, so stuff is outside of source, which is what I should have been putting stuff in. So let's do that. API lib, and then my utils should move to source, not my root. So then I should be able to replace that, and that should not have messed anything else up. It has not. Great, including my get URL. Perfect. All right, so then we need our state at the end of all of that. So after our auth URL, I know we're going to need to do a catch here. So we're going to catch our error, and just so the errors go away, that's all I need, and then return void for now. I'll change that in a second. I won't. I'll just do it now. All right, so we're going to set a constant of headers to be new headers. I'm going to X out of Claude. Then we're going to append our cookie, which comes from our authorization cookies package. We already imported that. So we'll append cookies with our headers. Oh, I need to plug in my laptop. That was a close one. I was down to 3%. Almost just crashed everything. We're good now. All right, so we have our append cookies. We're going to append to our headers the code verifier, which will be our code verifier. Then we will append cookie again, which will be headers. OAuth state, which will be state. And then append cookie, headers, client, flag. And then again, we're checking if there is a client flag. If there is, we can set it to true. Otherwise, it can be an empty string. All of our type errors go away there. And now we need to set headers. So we're going to do headers.set location with our auth URL to a string. And then we can do our return a new response null with our headers, and then a status of 302. So that is a temporary redirect. Yes, no, permanent redirect. I have to remember. It's been so long since I have done stuff like this. 302. Yes, it is a temporary redirect. Okay. So now we're going to catch, but it won't be our error. Too far. Okay. So we'll catch constant of headers and set that to be new headers. Then we'll set our headers to location, and then our get server-side URL, our client flag, if it exists, with client. Otherwise, we'll redirect to our login with an error that just says error equals OAuth failed. So after that, we can return a new response null headers status 302. Then we need to include a method which will be a get method, and our path will be auth Google. We set a constant of headers here, new headers. Oh, that's somehow out of my catch. So that goes there. Method auth Google. Perfect. No type errors, just had to move some stuff around. Great. So next up is our callback. So the callback is where we then get the application So authentication is complete. We go to the callback. That validates the provider response, hands off identity resolution to payload. So this is finally where we get to the payload aspect of all of this equation. So far, it's all just been Google and how Google expects this to be. And of course, the proof key code exchange. So this is going to be done by getting our codes, error parameters, the PKCE verifier, strategy metadata, and then clearing the temporary cookies regardless of what happens, whether we get authorized and authenticated or not. And then finally, using Payload's auth function to validate and verify that we have a user with the OAuth profile set up. Oh, okay. So a lot of work so far gone into this, but we're making it almost to the end here. So now we need a new endpoint, which is going to be in our source API. So here we're going to create a new file in our API folder, in our users folder, in our auth folder, in our Google folder, and that's going to be callback.typescript. So here we then again need our crypto package. From crypto, we'll import our type of endpoint from payload, but we also need generate payload cookie, the JW2T or JOT sign, then parse cookies, and then there are other types that we need, so I'm going to include them up here where we need our payload request, which should be here. Weird. Then we need our sanitized permissions. And then finally, our typed user. Below that, we need to be able to clear our cookie. So we're going to get that from our library cookie file. And then finally, we need our get server-side URL again. But this actually comes from utilities and is our get URL. So we're going to create the type that we need. That's going to be an auth result, which will need permissions, which will be our sanitized permissions, and then our response headers, if they exist. So we want this to be able to be nullable. Then we need our user, which can be null, but it can also be a typed user with an intersection of the SID if it's available, which is a string, then the strategy if it's available, it's a string, and then finally our collection of users. And all of that should be right. So now we can export our callback function as a constant. So export our constant of Google callback. We need our endpoint from payload. We already imported that. Then we need our handler, which will be an async function, which will have a payload request. And that of course resolves to a promise response. Then we'll have a constant of URL, which will be a new URL with the request URL or our server-side URL. So if there is no URL, it'll always resolve back to whatever we have set as our server-side URL. In this case, it'll be localhost and will only ever be localhost. All right, so then we have our code, which we will get from our search params. We need our code, we need our error. Of course, the time that I want autocomplete to work, it doesn't. And then we need our state. Then we can set our cookie constant by parsing the cookies from our request headers. And so again, this is the payload request headers. Then we can do our code verifier. This will get from our cookies the code verifier. Then we'll store the OAuth state, which we'll get from our cookies as well. And then finally our client flag, which again we'll get from our cookie. And this is a comparison, so we need to make sure that it's set to true. Now we can clear temporary cookies, so we'll do a constant of headers to initialize our headers. We'll clear the cookie, the headers of the code verifier, to make sure that we're clearing this out ahead of time before we try to authenticate anything. So then we'll do headers, OAuth state, and our client flag. So all of that should now be clear by this point. So now we can check if there's an error, and that error is equal to enter action required, or error is equal to login required, or the error is equal to consent required. Fix that up. Let's wrap. If all of that is true, or rather any of that is true, we will set our headers to have a location, and that location will be our get server-side URL without all of this junk. Then we'll do API users auth Google force consent equal to true. Then we'll check our client flag, which is checking if client login is set to true. Otherwise, we'll return an empty string. From there, to close out the if statement here, we can return a new response, null, headers, status of 302. So again, temporary redirect. Okay. So after that, we can handle the error redirect with a reason, which will be a string, and the reason should always be provided. We want helpful errors here. So we're going to set headers, location. Then we're going to get our server-side URL again. And then this time we are going to check for the client flag if that's equal to client. If it is, we can, or sorry, if client flag exists, we can set it to client. Otherwise, we can do admin login with error set to reason. Then underneath that, we can return a new response, null, headers, status 302. Reusable code there. So we just keep returning that at this point. So then under this, if there is no state, or there is no OAuth state, or state does not equal the OAuth state, something has gone wrong. We have not validated our OAuth state here, so we're going to do a console error and do invalid OAuth state. Then we can provide the OAuth state and the state for troubleshooting. Then we need to return our error redirect and say invalid state. If there is no code or there is no code verifier, we can do another console error. This time it's going to say that we're missing parameters. So missing OAuth parameters. And then we can provide our code and code verifier for troubleshooting and return an error redirect missing parameters. Now we can actually try to get into Payload. We will try we'll set our try and catch here. Our constant will be payload, and so we're getting our payload from our request. We'll then get our auth result by awaiting payload.auth. Then we'll set our headers, get new headers. Do not disturb on my watch. Keep getting notifications and it's distracting me. All right, new headers. And here we can get our auth strategy. We'll set that to Google. Then we'll set our auth code to our code. Then our, that's too much, auth verifier with our code verifier. Then we can store or we can pull out our user from our auth result, and that can be an auth result. We're casting it as an auth result, which comes from our interface up here. And I forgot an S right there. All right, so now if there is no user, we can log another error and say authentication failed, no user returned. Then we can return an error redirect again with authentication failed. I'm cool with that. Making sure that didn't import anything new. Then underneath that, we can get our collection from our payload collections users. So that's the collection that we're getting. And that is being stored in our constant collection here. Then we need our auth config, which is going to come from our collection config auth. And then we'll set a secret, which will come from crypto, where we will create a hash, which will be SHA-256. I wanted to say SHA, but I feel like that's not what people say. We'll update that to be our payload config secret. So this is the payload secret that we set. This is one reason why it's required, is for salting and hashing passwords. Then we need to digest it as a hex value. And then we can slice it and only get the first 32 digits of it, or the first 32 characters of it. Quick water break. Perfect. All right, so underneath the secret, we need to get our token. So we'll set a constant token. We're actually pulling this out of our JOT sign, JWT sign, however you want to say it. We need our fields to sign, which will be strategy, which will be our user strategy. Otherwise, it'll be undefined. Let's make sure I'm doing this right. We're awaiting JOT sign, pulling out the token. Strategy undefined, perfect. We get our collection of users. Our email will be the user email. The ID will be our user ID, which Payload stores for us automatically. Then we need our user SID, or return something undefined. Then we need our secret, and then finally our token expiration, which will be from our auth config token expiration. Just to make things consistent, let's set that down here. All right. So now we can generate Payload's cookie. So I already know what my catch statement is going to be. It's one line, return, error redirect, OAuth failed is what we're going to say. Which is not very helpful, but it works. All right, so underneath the token, we're going to set constant of cookies, generate payload cookie. Collection auth config will be our auth config. Then we need our cookie prefix, which will be payload config cookie prefix. Then we need our token, which needs to exist, so we're using a non-null assertion there. That way our cookies have everything it needs. Then we can set our headers with location. Then we will get our server-side URL. And after that, we will check client flag if it exists. If it does, we need to return client. Otherwise, it can be admin. Then that's all we need there. We can then append to our headers our cookies. So we can set cookie, cookies, and then finally return a new response, which is going to be what it has been all along, null, then headers, status of temporary redirect, or 302. So we can save this, but we see down here, I need to set a method and a path, which is auth Google callback. And now all my type errors are gone. All right, next up is the actual auth strategy. So now we're starting to work our way from Google and what Google needs to be now what Payload needs. So we're working with the handshake between Google and Payload here. So Payload has custom authentication strategies. That's what we're about to dive into right now. So this is where, as it's mentioned here, the OAuth identity is converted into a Payload user in our users collection. So without further ado, let's dive into that. So this looks like a whole other file. Let's see what it is and see where it goes. So it looks like this is just missing where it should be. So we'll wait a second. Perfect. So we know we need this merge auth TypeScript and we know where it goes. So we will go into our utilities and then do a merge auth .typescript file. Now in here, we're going to export a function called merge auth. Instead of that, we're going to do t extends object. So that is a generic extends object. Then existing will be that generic or undefined. Then updates will be a partial of that generic, and it will resolve to that generic. So let's wrap this. We can set our base to be equal to existing or an empty object as t, so we're casting that as t. Then we will have a constant of pick, which will be k, extends type of key, or sorry, type of, extends the key of t, so k is the key. Then get rid of all of this. This will be non-nullable, so this is making it so we are getting the non-null version of this type, but we can still return null. Then we can set a constant called update value. We're going to update the key. Then we're going to return the result down here, just so I have it. So then if we update our value, and that's equal to undefined, or update val is equal to an empty string, or update val is equal to null, we can return a base key or null, or we can return the update val, and then here we need a constant of result. Now we can actually get to the result. An empty object as t. Then we're going to do for constant of key of object keys base, and then beyond base we're actually going to use the spread operator of base and updates. And then this is as key of t, and that'll be an array. Then we can do a result key equals pick key. So this is going to be an error, and we want to tell TypeScript to expect this error. So we allow null for missing values to help us in our function creation and our user authentication and our handshake. So this is a requirement for this to work, but that just means we expect the error, and that's not a big deal. So up here, let's see what this is doing before we decide where it's going. So if I look up auth strategy, I don't think I have this anywhere. I don't. So this is going to be a way to just define the strategy. So I think this can go into our library auth, and we'll call it strategy. So I'm going to create a new file called strategy.ts. Then we can import crypto from crypto. We'll import Google from Google APIs, and then we'll import, these are all types, so I'm going to import type of auth strategy and auth strategy result from Payload. Then we'll import our type of user from our payload types. We can import our get server-side URL, and then finally our merge auth that we just created. So we'll create our interface session user, and this is going to extend our user, which will have our SID string, strategy, which will be a string, and then finally our collection, which expects the users as the user's string as a type. This would come in handy if you had either multiple user types or if you had a different name for the collection. You can just set it here. Then we need our client ID, which we'll store as our business client ID. And then our client secret, same thing. These are both non-nullable, so we need to make sure that these exist. Otherwise, this won't work. Then we can export our Google strategy as a constant. This will be an auth strategy. Then we can authenticate with our headers and payload with a promise to resolve to an auth strategy result. We'll set our constant of code to be equal to our headers, and we're going to get our OAuth code that we set earlier. Our code verifier will be set equal to get from our headers the OAuth code verifier that we set earlier, and then finally the strategy, which will be equal to headers. And again, we're getting this from our auth strategy. We'll set our provider as a constant. We're going to store it we're going to store Google as a constant in our provider constant. And again, constant, don't know why that just happened. Constant just resolves this type to the strictest version of the type. So it's just a way of being a little bit more type safe as we continue to type here. Okay. So then, if our strategy does not equal our provider, we can return our user as a null value. And if there is no code or no code verifier, we can return, again, a null user. Then we can try to initialize our OAuth 2 client, which will be a new Google OAuth 2 client, which needs our client ID, our client secret, and then our redirect URI, which is our get server-side URL, API, users, auth, Google callback. Underneath that, we will set or get our tokens pulled out of our OAuth 2 client. We're going to get the token. Instead of code here, we need our code and our code verifier. If there are no tokens of ID token, we can return a null user. Then we can verify, so constant verify equals await OAuth 2 client. We're going to verify the ID token. We're going to have an audience of client ID and ID token of tokens, ID token. Then underneath verify, we're going to have a constant of user info verify get payload. If there is no user info, we're going to return a null user. We will verify that the email exists. So email verified. If that does not, if the email is not verified, then we'll return a null user. We can set a constant called sub, which is going to get our user info sub. Then our email, which will get our user info email, and we'll set it to lowercase. If there is no sub and there's no email, we can return our user as a null user. starting to notice a trend here. Let's space this out just a little bit. Now we're going to actually find our user. So if we can, we're going to await payload.find. Then in here we'll have a collection of users. We're going to limit it to just one. There will be no pagination. We don't want to show hidden fields. Let's make sure that didn't imported FA for some reason. I just wanted false. Where the email equals email. Then we will get our docs and cast that as our session user. I messed something up here. All right, so user, this is actually supposed to be parentheses. And that means that this comes down here. Okay, hold on one second. This autocomplete is killing me. All right, so that is the find. Perfect. So docs goes there. 0 as session user. Okay. Underneath this, if there is no user, we'll return a null user. Then we can check or store our existing strategies as our user external ID. If it exists, then the auth strategies. Otherwise, it can be an empty array. We will set this up here in a moment as well, because it seems to be coming from our user. Then we can set existing equals existing strategies. We'll find our strategy, auth provider equals provider. So again, this is all stuff that we'll be setting up in our user itself. If existing provider user ID, and if that exists and the existing provider user ID does not equal sub, we can return a null user. Now we can store our collection, our user collection, in our payload collections users, and our auth config will be stored in this constant here as well. Then we will let our SID be a string or undefined, set now to a new date, which will always update. Then we are setting our token expiration in milliseconds, which is going to be our auth config token expiration, or 7200 milliseconds times 1000, so 7200 seconds. And then set our constant expires at equals new date now get time. So we're getting the time of our now constant plus the token expiration in milliseconds. Yes. Underneath this, if our auth config has use sessions in it, we can set our SID equal to crypto random UUID. Then store our session in a constant called session. with created at is equal to now dot to ISO string expires at to ISO string, and then finally our ID, which will be our strategy ID. All right, so underneath all of that, we're going to remove our expired sessions now. So user sessions, we'll see if an array is an array of user sessions. If that's true, we'll spread operator remove expired sessions, user sessions, session, or we'll return an array of sessions. Mess something up here. So user.sessions is equal to an array is array user sessions. All right, we'll come back to this in just a moment. Oh, this still needs to be there. All right. If, so this if ends there. I swear there's probably just an extra. All right, yeah, we'll take a look at this in just a second. All right, so underneath, yep, so that should definitely go there. All right, we'll fix this in just a second. So now, underneath that, we need to prepare our Google update, and that's going to be our access token, which will be tokens, access token, auth provider, which will be our provider, ID token, which will be our tokens ID token, provider user ID, which will be sub, refresh token, tokens, refresh token, token expiry, tokens expiry date, or if that doesn't exist, we'll do a new date, or if it does exist, sorry, if expiry date does exist, we'll do tokens expiry date to ISO string, otherwise it'll be undefined, token issued at now to ISO string, and then token type will be tokens token type if that exists, otherwise bearer. Then we need to merge with an existing auth data, which we created our merge auth here just a moment ago. So we need merge auth existing Google update. Then we need our constant of auth strategies, which is going to be an array of existing strategies. So this is future-proofing the project. We're going to filter our strategies. Then we will check if there is a strategy, do the auth provider. If that does not equal the provider, then our Google auth. Now, underneath that, we can persist our session by going to our payload DB, and we're going to update 1. That'll be our collection users. And then for our data, we're going to get our external ID, which doesn't exist yet. And we'll use the spread operator for our user external ID or an empty object. Then our auth strategies. And then our sessions, which will be user sessions. Then underneath that, we need our ID, which will be our user ID. Then finally, returning will be false. So we need to fix that external ID here shortly. Now we can set our session user and store it as a constant called session user. So session user, which will be type session user. And that's equal to our user using the spread operator, which has a strategy ID of SID. Then our strategy, which will be our provider strategy. Then collection will be our users. Finally, we can return our user, which will be a session user. Otherwise, we need to catch our error. That will be a console error, Google authentication error, and we can set the error there, then return a user that's null. Finally, we'll use name, Google. Okay. Perfect. So there's a couple errors in here. First, we have this any type that we need to fix, this user sessions part that we need to fix, but we're going to continue on first and see if the rest of the project is fixed by what we're doing here. So now we can export a constant called remove expired sessions. And that is going to be our sessions created at, which will be null or a string, expires at, which will be just a string, and then an ID, which will also be a string, and this will all be an array. Then we can set our constant of now, set equal to a new date, and then return our sessions filter by expires at. So we need expires at. And then we'll set new date instead of this here. We'll check if expires at is greater than now. So now we can come up here, because I think I had, yeah, this is payload shared. So we can get rid of that, which allows this. And then we're going to fix our external ID. We'll fix our any type as well, external ID and any type. But that did fix our user sessions. I was just using the wrong function because we hadn't created it yet. So as I mentioned, that got fixed as we continued on, and the rest of these type issues will change as soon as we update our user collection. So I'm going to jump ahead to that real quick. So this will be the last part before we actually set up the trigger for somebody to log in. So let's go to our users collection. So we're going to go to our collections, we're going to go to users, and here we are. So we're going to import our Google OAuth from API users auth Google. All right, so I put mine elsewhere, but whatever works. We can import our Google callback. And then finally, our Google strategy. Which again, we put somewhere else, but it's all the same. So we have our slug users. This doesn't matter, but auth, it needs to change. So we're going to open this up into an object. And then for the cookies, we're going to use our next public server host name. I'm just going to copy and paste this because this is what we use as well. And we're going to use a non-null assertion because it won't work without it. Same site will be lax because that's what we're sending through. And then secure. If it is production, we will be secure. So we will still allow login with username. We will allow login with username, which will still allow email login. So we'll set that to true. We'll require our email, which is also going to be true. And then finally, our username, which will also be true. Then we can do a max login attempt of 5, just to copy. We'll do strategies, which will be our Google strategy. We'd be able to set up more just using the same thing. Token expiration, which would be 60 times 60 times 24 times 7. And then we'll use sessions and set that to be true. We'll need comma there. We'll need some endpoints, which will be our Google auth and Google callback. And then we will, in our fields here, have some tabs. So I'll use tabs. And in here, we'll have our fields. And in our fields, we'll have fields. And then in those fields, we're going to have admin. That will be hidden true, read only true. So we don't want people to see this or edit it if they can see it. We'll change this name or assign this name of provider user ID. And finally, type of text. Then underneath that, we'll do admin. Oh, sorry, we're doing this upside down from how I would do it. So this will come up here. Then I'm just going to copy and paste this because we're going to use the same thing down here. But instead of provider user ID, this will be access token, which will be text. What did I break? Fields, tabs, fields. It's another fields here. I think I'm making this too complicated, but that's okay. So fields, 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 tabs, fields. It's okay. We're gonna work through this. So then after that, we will have another one, which will be name refresh token type of text, which will have an admin of hidden true, read only true. Then underneath that will be a token type. That will be a type of text. Again, admin, hidden, true, read only, true. So we have our provider user ID, our access token, our refresh token, our token type, After that is our ID token. Name be ID token. Type of text, again, admin. After that, token expiry. Name, token expiry. Type will be date this time, but it's still going to be admin read only and hidden. Then we'll do our refresh token expiry. So we do that here. Refresh token expiry. Then we need our token issued at. Token issued at be type of date. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Then we need our auth provider. So we've got name auth provider with our options. Again, we want this to be future-proofed, so we're going to add multiple options, but for now, we're just using Google. Value of Google. And then type of select. So here's where I got confused, because here we're going to have label of strategies, which will have a name of auth strategies and a type of array. Then beneath that, we'll have our label of external ID with a name of external ID, and then underneath that, a type of tabs. All right, and that clears all of that. And my stress levels are now back down to normal. So we're getting close. So we just need to do the front end trigger here, and then we can test everything at once. But first, since we did all of that, we're going to do pnpm generate types. And just in case, we're going to do, and that should actually be payload generate types, and then payload, we're going to generate our import map. So just so we have it, just in case. All right, next up is our trigger. So this is going to be client side. We need to use client, and then we will figure it out from there. So we will just create a components folder. First, let's go to strategy. All of our type errors should go away, except for our any type and that typo. There we go. So it's really that any type just came from a typo. So that's fixed now. This should be auth provider. Great. So now we're going to create a new file in our source directory, which will be our components. And this is going to be our button. So this is going to be our, we'll just say Google button. And since this is a React component, let's do Google button in Pascal case. So we do know that this is going to use client because we need state. We're going to import use state from React. We're also going to import React from React. Okay, weird. Then we're going to import FC Google, and we're going to use React icons, which we need to install. So let's do npm add react icons. And I'm going to use this because Lucid Icons doesn't have branded logos anymore. I think I have to do all of this. Okay. So that's installed. We can, this is using shadcn as well. That just feels like a lot of extra unnecessary stuff, so I'm just going to create a button without it. But we are going to use a, we need our port type user from Payload our payload types. And then we can set our type provider to be equal to a non-nullable, and this non-nullable will take another non-nullable user. So let's make this a little bit more clear. A nullable user, and we'll get the external ID. And then from there, we need the auth strategies. And we'll get the number. So this is returning a single auth provider. Then we can export a constant called after login, which will be a function that takes our state. So I'm going to use state, which is going to be loading and set loading. And that will be initially false. Then we'll handle our login with a provider, which will be a type of provider, which will not be an async function, but will be a synchronous function with set loading set to true. And we'll get our window location href equal to API users auth provider, and I don't need this part. Then under that after login, we're going to return a button, and I'm just going to use the button that this provides, except let's do some margin top. We'll do margin top of 8 because this is coming after the login. Then we will set a button. I will do this. Then we will set the button to be disabled when loading. On click, we'll handle the login for Google. The class names are already set that I'm going to use. I don't need to use the size icon in the variant outline, but I will set this to be size of 6. I don't actually have Tailwind installed here, so this is not going to do what we want it to do. But that's okay. So let's see. Have AI do this for me. Can you change this from Tailwind, which is not installed, to inline styles? So we'll let AI take care of that part. Perfect use for AI. Love it. All right. So that should work great. But now we need to go to the front end in the admin panel I believe this is the same thing. It looks like the same thing. So we'll then go to our root here in our payload config. We will, in our admin, add a component. And then we're going to add after login, which is going to expect a path. Should be an array of paths though. And then we're going to set this. We've got our Google button, so this is actually more than that, but that's fine. Cancel. We don't need all of that, so we can just find where source is. Do that there. And then this is not default, so we need to include after login for our component. And now I can run generate types and import map one more time. Then we can run pnpm dev. Open up our admin, and hopefully this just works because I'm running out of steam. All right, so I'm still logged in. We can go to our logout. So then I've got this Google button here, which does not look great right now. So let's change this from this button to just sign in with Google. Then I click it. Route not found. API users auth Google. So that should be pretty easy. If I move this to my root, does that fix it? Refresh, sign in with Google. API users auth Google. This is why you test as you go. All right, so maybe this needs to go from source into my app, which would make sense. Okay, last place to check, add it to front end, because I can't add it to Payload, which already has API. Unless that's where it's supposed to be. Very interesting. So now we can ask our AI chat. I get this when I click on my Google login button. Let's go ahead and delete this. All right, so let's bring this back up to my source directory. So we'll do my API folder. We'll drop users in there. So the problem is in my Google TypeScript. I forgot to add I added an extra space, which really, it was that easy to do. All right, so let's figure out what the next step is. So if we refresh and I hit sign in with Google, you can't sign into this app's valid request. You can try again later or contact them if you are a developer. Oh, it's trying to, I'm logged in as someone else. So why don't we do it this way? I'll go to Chrome, which will make this easier. At least I hope so. Then we go to localhost 3000, admin. Sign in with Google. Access block this app's request is okay. To the next thing. My problem is likely API users Google. I think I missed something in my callback here, so let's add that. It's safe. Go back to Chrome, hit back here. There we go. Can sign in. That email already exists. I can send that through. Authentication failed. No user returned. Header name is wrong. Typos galore. All right, what line is this though? So this needs to be code verifier then. So now if I refresh, and so I could use this error message as well if I needed to, but if I sign in with Google, I'll try this again, hit continue. There we go, I'm logged in. So just as simple as that, just took 2 hours, but if I go to my user now, I don't really want to show anything, but I can add additional auth strategies, which would just be Google here. Oh, username, Nick, code with Nick. So I can save that. But now if I go and log out, I should be able to log in with my test password as well. So I'm able to log in both with Google and with my password, username, or email. So super flexible in what you can do with Payload and with OAuth providers. So this was very intensive. There are a lot of steps. I will cut this up into be more of a streamlined tutorial, but shout out to Rubix Studios for providing this content for me to go through and really look through the article and figure out what needs to work and how, and then also making me, talk it out and figure it out as I go. So custom authentication is pretty difficult. It's something that you should not take lightly, and it is something that is doable in Payload. So you don't need an enterprise package. You don't need to set up some random custom build. It's all done within Payload, as you can see here. So we can start looking at other authentication platforms using things like Facebook, using things like Twitter, any other identity platforms can be used for this as well. So we will revisit this topic as we continue to build up our knowledge about other identity providers as well. Looking forward to that, but this was fun. This was a lot of work. And I learned a lot about how cookies are passed, how JWTs are signed, JOTs are signed, whatever, how to set expiry dates, how to think through all of the different aspects of authentication, and making sure that this is as secure as possible. So things that could be done, we could also go back and just disable password login after authentication is set through Google. That way people can only log in with Google. We could override the login form by just removing it and then having a login form that checks if the email address is there. And if it is, they can then either enter the password, but you can also have Payload check if there is a provider. You can have them just select which provider to log in with. So lots of cool things that we can do with this. We will come back to it. We will explore more with it, but I am out of steam. So again, shout out Rubix Studios. Thanks for the great article. Thanks for suggesting me doing something like this for it. So I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all for joining me. Hope you learned something, and I hope that this video was helpful. If it was, make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel. That way you never miss when I release more content about Payload, Next.js, and other modern web dev. I have a newsletter called Next in Dev where I collect all the industry news in modern web dev and consolidate it into one newsletter and send it out every Friday. So be sure that you're getting that to get helpful tips, tricks, and news all across the web dev industry. If you're not already a member of my channel, you can become a member of the channel through YouTube or through Patreon. Links on how you can support me with partnership and membership in that way. All of that is in the description. So that's all I have. I look forward to getting back into this. And again, if this was helpful, and again, I hope that this was helpful. Share your thoughts. I want recommendations. I want comments, just anything. No. How do I want to end this? If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, please leave those in the comment section. I read every comment and respond to most of them. But now, until then, I'll see you in the next one. Okay, that was a lot. I'm glad I did it, but I honestly didn't think that was going to take me 2 hours to do. So that was a lot of work. Only a little bit of troubleshooting though, so I was pretty proud of that I was able to translate everything as I went and understand it. So a couple things here and there, a couple of hiccups in how things were written. Not exactly how I would write certain things, but I don't think that matters too much. I am going to commit this though. I'm going to have Claude commit it anyway. So people can see it. This is part of a mono repo. Please commit it and push to main. But yeah, so this was a lot of fun. I enjoy, like, these harder topics are really, I think, what makes Payload so valuable. Like, you can do essentially whatever you want, so that is really cool. But I'm just doing my last few things of wrap up here. There's a couple of things that I do with the live stream. So I'm here checking comments, just seeing what's going on as I get my recordings to where I need them to go. So bear with me a moment as I do that. Need a new Finder window. So this is going to purely for example repo. Don't create a PR. So Claude does a better job at committing things than I do, so I'm having it do all of that for me. It's not committing anything that doesn't need to go, like my environment variables, my cursor folder that gets added every time now that I don't use. But now I need, today's the 18th. And then I'm going to set target file to be custom auth. Yeah, I am going to cut this up and make this a little bit more streamlined and easier to follow. But that's going to take some time. I've got some things coming up, so I'm looking forward to diving in some more with this content. But let's see here, camera, computer, Remux, and then this can move as well. And there is going to, so this will be part of my example repo to make it easier for everybody else so they don't have to do what I did. So let's get rid of that. Then all of these, some cleanup as we go. I think that's it. So I will have Claude get this up and running, and that's it. So I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.